Hi, my name is Greig Fraser. I'm the DP of Dune, and this is the Go Creative Show.
Hello and welcome to the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers. My name is Ben Consoli, and today we speak with Greig Fraser, Director of Photography for Dune. Welcome back to the show, Greg.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me again.
Clearly, there is an enormous amount to talk about with Dune. It definitely was the most highly anticipated film of the year. I know that it's been getting rave reviews. Everybody's obsessed with it. It looks amazing. There's so much to discuss, and we'll get to it all in just a moment. But before we get there, I want to mention MZ, Empowering Filmmakers. They're sponsoring this episode today, as well as to encourage you to follow us on your favorite podcast app, as well as Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. All things Go Creative Show at gocreativeshow.com. So, what a movie to be part of. You have had a run. Wow. My God. We had you on a little while back, a couple of years back for Rogue One. And it's just, your career is just skyrocketing and for good reason. But still, there has to be a point where you sort of pinch yourself and you're like, wow, this is pretty wild.
What? The thing is that every job that I do, though, not disagreeing with what you're saying, but every job that I do, I seem to focus just on that job, or I don't see it as a bigger picture. But yeah, now that you've mentioned it, it's like, yeah, the last few years have been a bit fun, haven't they? Like, I've got the chance to play in some very cool universes, and play with some very cool characters and some very amazing directors and producers and actors. So yeah, it's been a great run. I've loved it.
Do you ever have a little bit of a craving to go and maybe do like a small indie or something really kind of low key, low budget, just to almost cleanse the palate in a way and sort of reground yourself? We've had some DPs come on and talk about that, where they sort of want and are craving just something simple and different and something that doesn't have so much pressure.
Well, I don't actually put a line in the sand. Like, there's, for example, we're talking about Dune right now. To me, you may see a big, over massive film. I see a series of characters, and I see a director that I'm working closely with, and I see sort of intimacy when it comes to characterizations. And yes, we got to go to an amazing country like Jordan, for example, Abu Dhabi. We got to shoot on some amazing sets and have some of the trappings of big film. But for me, ultimately, it comes down to I walk into the stage every day in the same way I would if it was a small movie or a big movie. And I approach the characters in the same way, and I approach the director in the same way. It just happens on this one, we had maybe more days and we had, like I said, a slightly larger scope. But having said that, though, I'm always wanting to do good story, and sometimes good and great story comes in the form of sort of small, more independent films. And sometimes those stories come in the larger studio-based films. It just so happened in the last few years that the latter has been more prevalent. And yeah, I'm totally open to whatever is my next movie. It comes down to story, it comes down to characters.
I think that sort of approach and that mindset is what is making Dune so enjoyable to watch and so well reviewed critically, because it's grounded. Like a movie like that that takes place in a completely different world, a completely different time. There's there's not a lot of reality to it. Yet the characters are relatable. There's a groundedness to it. And I think in the cinematography, you let us feel like we're close to these characters, which is certainly a decision I'm sure you're making and something that makes it feel more relatable, which, I think is important for a movie like this.
One of the things that as I was moving up the ranks, let's go back to sort of what you're talking about in terms of larger films. As I was getting larger and larger budgets, what I was noticing was that there was every opportunity to move away from what intrinsically existed back in the day when I was shooting small movies with intimate characters. Like, there was every opportunity to move away from those things. And I resisted that. And I think directors that had asked me to shoot with them and that I'd agreed to shoot with also resisted that, and also saw maybe in my smaller work that intimacy. So it is something that I go on to set every day with the same expectations. Like I'm in the very fortunate position that I don't have to market and sell a movie. Like I don't have to market it to the masses. I don't have to worry about if there's X amount of bums on seats, for example. But of course, as a filmmaker and as a creative person, I want people to see what I've done. So it goes without saying that it's lovely to have people see what I've done in conjunction with my director. But that's thankfully not my primary motivation. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
have my motivation comes from a place of sort of pure characterization.
I read a quote from you, and I think it was Hollywood Reporter. It might have been Variety. I'm not sure. You say you don't take on projects. You don't take on projects you don't get nervous about. Fear is always part of it. I loved that quote, and I wanted to just dive a little bit deeper into that philosophy and ask you why. Why is it that you are only taking projects that you fear?
Well, otherwise it gets boring, doesn't it? Like it's a long time we spend making films, and they're generally not down the road from my house. Generally they're a bit of a trip away. There's maybe one or two films that I've done in my past that has been a nice get up in the morning, drive my car, park my car, get out, like the classic sort of more 9 to 5 existence. But for the most part, every other film I've done, it's a big experience, as in it's being away from home for a long time, be it in India with Lion, or being in London with Rogue One, or Budapest with Dune. Like it's always a long time away, and that then takes its toll on your family, which means you've got to get a lot out of the film. Like it's got to give back to you as a creative person. You're contributing not only your skill, let's say, be it production design, cinematography, sound design, whatever that might be. You're not just contributing your skill. That film also has to give back to you in order to warrant the pressure that it puts on other things, family, health, being. It's making a film's tough. Making a film is not an easy experience. So you need to go into that film with the right people. And I'm thankful that my crew who we used on Dune is my very, very close crew, and I get a lot out of that relationship with them. But also, I want to be inspired every day to be growing, to be learning, because like there is a lot to be learning from in this industry, but there is a position that I think filmmakers can get stale, and you can do what you did on the last film or the one before and just keep repeating the same playlist. So that to me is not the most enjoyable part of the process. For me, the most enjoyable part of the process is learning, stumbling, making a mistake. Hopefully, no one will notice my mistake. And then carry on the next day as a head held high, pretending that I know what I'm doing.
What scared you about Dune?
It's a big film, like you've just said. Like it's a big film. It's a big story. Um, the pressure from doing a film like Dune is that there are a lot of people with high expectations of this film. This is, what do they call this? The unfilmable film, or the unmakeable film, or something. Like it's a big statement to make for somebody towards people who are about to go and make a movie. There's all this.
It's not a great way to start a project.
No, like it's a terrible way, because instantly you're on the back foot going, oh, is that right? Are they right about this? Like, how do I approach this? And so, thankfully, working with Denis, though, like Denis knew exactly what this film was. Like this is what inspired. I mean, I would work with Denis on anything, frankly, because he's such a master craftsman and a master filmmaker. But for this, he knew what this film was. Like he knew what these characters are. Like he knew from day one. Didn't necessarily mean that it wasn't open to idea either. Like he was very open to ideas, but he knew from day one what this film was. So, I've got high expectations for my work, and I've got high expectations for the work that I do with someone like Denis. And it's not like Denis hasn't worked with some of the best cinematographers in the world, right? So it's like he knows he knows cinematography. So there's a bit of a pressure there.
Does that help though when you're working with someone that knows cinematography so well? And like, does it almost make you better, or what do you think that helped? How do you think that helps?
I'm a firm believer in the idea that relationships with film in filmmaking, everybody grows off each other, right? So what I have learned of other directors, I'm able to bring to this movie or other movies, and perhaps what Denis has learned from other filmmakers, other cinematographers, he is bringing to this project. So I feel like I'm experiencing the culmination of Denis' multiple film experiences, the multiple DPs that he's worked with, and I can draw upon that, and I can take the experiences that he enjoyed with those cinematographers and learn from those experiences. So I I am a firm believer in that, and that goes all around. It goes with me learning from my focus puller who's just worked with another DP on another project, from my gaffer, from my grip. Like this is one of the enjoyable things about filmmaking is that it's hopefully just a series of learned new experiences, and everybody's learning off each other. There's still the hierarchy that doesn't change. Like my, my director is still the person on set who is going to call the shots and have the final say.
Yeah.
But if I can learn from what he's saying about a particular scene, the way he sees the scene, maybe he did that on another film in the past, or maybe I've done something in the past on another film that I want to tell him or her what's happening. Like so that communal group learn is a great part of the job.
I want to start talking about the look of Dune, the lighting, the camera choices, lenses, all that fun stuff. And I want to begin with a question that we got from Instagram from Domingo Shake. He asked, how did you get that gorgeous soft top light? How many layers of diffusion did you use? Yeah, I mean, when you watch this, there's a softness to this in such a harsh environment that is kind of unique. Like you almost expect when you're in the desert to have like a really hard, heavy light, because that's what you expect in our world. But in the Dune world, it's soft in a way that almost draws you in. And I saw it throughout the entire piece. And I think that's a great question from Domingo. So thank you for the question, and curious what your answer is.
Well, I mean, it's hard to be specific because you're right. Broadly, there is a certain soft light, and that comes from it's motivated by the fact that inside the residence, inside the interiors, there's no direct sun. The place is built not to have direct sun because the sun's harsh and the lack of water, and so if you were building buildings in that environment, you would make sure that yes, you don't have lights inside, but you have light wells. So you might have big openings that get the sun, but they bounce through these light wells. And so that was the kind of motivation, is that everything that's inside is soft. It can be directional, as in it's got edges to it. In fact, it should, but it can be soft edges and soft direction. So how many layers of diffusion? That was a very I can't tell you because every situation was different, but there was clearly an overriding level of softness that we were aiming for, that we either kept adding diffusion to. It's very much like some of these sets. These are some of the biggest sets I've shot. So going back to what you said before about scale, and size. Like I walked in to this particular stage in Budapest, stage 6 it was, and it's 140 feet. It's a football field long, the whole thing. And the set was in one long corridor, one big open, wide corridor. Yeah, I won't lie to you and tell you that I was like, yep, got this, no worries. I know exactly what I'm doing here. I know how to light it, because I didn't. I had no idea how to light it. And we did test after test after test. We did mock-up pieces. We got lights in from London. So between Jamie Mills, my gaffer, and Christian, who's a Hungarian gaffer, we just tested every conceivable light source to come up with that right feel, because there's a certain direction to it, a certain sharpness to it, but it has to be a soft direction as well. So it was very much trial and error, very much trial and error.
Where'd you land on it? Were you going through all those tests?
Well, we used LEDs. We used color changeable LEDs, either digital Sputniks or cream sources or Space Forces, I think. But we ended up using directional LEDs. So I'm a big fan of directional LEDs that have focus and have spot to them, that have sharpness to them, despite what I've just said about softness.
Yeah.
Because the thing about that is you can then soften it slightly. You can then add a degree of softening to it, and then it has that nice roll off. My concern with any soft lights, is that you don't have any opportunity to sharpen them up. So there's a very fine balance. My eye's quite sensitive to lights that are too soft. It feels too manipulated or too lovely, too pretty. Like there's got to be a little bit of edge to it. Something. There's got to be something to it. So we learn in different ways, different degrees, different diffusions, and
But your preference is to have that kind of like LED Fresnel, I guess, for lack of a better term, just something that you can shape. And then are you throwing that through diffusion? Are you bouncing it?
I'm going through diffusion most of the time. I would love to bounce it a lot of the time. Book lights are fantastic.
Yeah.
But I don't think we had the level or we had the amount of lights to do that. And also, I think when I bounced it, it didn't have the direction that I wanted. So they're not Fresnels though, because unfortunately there's only a couple of LED Fresnels, like the Orbiter. And
sure, yeah.
The Orbiter didn't exist in its current form when we were shooting. So, the lights we were using, the digital Sputniks primarily, they have a degree of focus. They're not focusable.
Okay.
But they have a degree of sharpness to them. If you point them on a wall, you can see where they fall off. They're not just some innocuous kind of blah line. They have a degree of sharpness to them. So because of that degree of sharpness, then it's up to me, but how soft I make that. So me and my team, of course.
Sure.
But then I'm not stuck with an automatic softness that is built by the manufacturer.
Now that makes sense for your interiors. How are you handling your exteriors?
Well, thankfully we had a great relationship with our host company, Photocam, and throughout the testing process, Denis and I kept going backwards and forwards about what LUT we should be choosing, and because there wasn't a LUT that existed that looked good for us. Denis felt that the exteriors needed to be hazy, a little bit, not cloudy, but haze, as if there's like a low level of sand in the air that just lingers the whole time. And that's great, except you've got to then get sand in the air that lingers the whole time, in which case you've got to have wind machines and you've got to have all the materials to do that. And thankfully on the back lot in Budapest, we did have that. So when we were shooting in Budapest, more often than not, we created wind. And that wind was constant, just again, it's to help sell the idea of this barrenness, of this kind of harshness of the place. So that helped a little bit. But then in combination with this particular LUT, which was, the highlights were pulled down, but they were bleached out. It was a tricky LUT to get because we did a bleach bypass test where, some film was shot bleach bypass in the past. We did a test on that with footage that we'd already done. And it felt like we had a look to it. It felt like it had a bleach bypass look. So Photocam was able to kind of weave their magic and take the highlights that we liked out of the bleach bypass and put it in another LUT that had low light capabilities. So, low end capabilities. So we made it a Frankenstein LUT, which served our highlights, which helped soften the sun a little bit, yet lifted the blacks and the mid-tones up. So shadows in the mids were lifted a little bit and the highlights were brought down and then softened. So it ended up kind of giving us a ballpark of where we wanted to be.
Yeah. What was your inspiration visually for this? I mean, there's, classically, you have the books. You also have the movie in the 80s. So there is sort of a perception of what Dune is and what Dune looks like. So you have that to contend with. What were you using to kind of inspire your visuals?
I mean, we didn't look at the film, so that wasn't part of our world at all. I was using Denis' explanation of how he felt this world as my inspiration. Like he described it very vividly how he saw it, and how to achieve that's a different story. Like how one thinks of something when they read a book versus how you achieve it can sometimes be very different.
What did he say to you?
He didn't want the sand to be yellow.
Okay.
Needed to be a slight sandy, golden, but not too saturated.
Yeah.
And he felt like he wanted the skies to be hazy, not dissimilar to the haze outside my window right now in Los Angeles. It's that June gloom that carries over to November in Venice Beach, where it just stays a little cloudy and a little kind of hazy for the whole day, even though there is sun behind there and you can feel that sun, but it feels a little hazy.
Yeah.
So, he'd seen, I think he'd been scouting with Patrice in Abu Dhabi and Dubai and seen this kind of little bit of haze in the air and went, we should work on getting this look, which is easier said than done, because if it's not hazy and it's not cloudy, it's hard to make that look hazy and cloudy when it's not.
Yeah. Especially
Mm,
outside. I mean, inside, maybe
yeah.
you can control some haze, but when you're outside,
Mm.
what do you do? So,
Well,
my God.
wind machines are good.
Yeah.
Wind machines are great. Lack of polarization. Sometimes when I've shot in the desert, I've polarized to try and get the deepest, darkest, bluest sky that I can.
Mm.
In this case, I did the opposite. If I did polarize, I polarized and blew out.
Huh. That's interesting. So,
Mm.
were you, when you say lack of polarization, you just absolutely no polarizer on the lens whatsoever? Or like,
It varied. It varied. I mean, again, part of my problem is my brain is Swiss cheese when it comes to individual setups. You know
of
what I mean?
course. Yeah.
But I
It
can
was a
tell you
long
right,
time ago.
it was. But I can tell
We
you right
ask a
now.
lot of our guests to remember back to when they filmed these things, but so if your memory's not 100%, don't worry.
But I can tell you right now that if I was doing it right now, I would ask for a polarizer and I'd say, is that making it better or worse? And if it's making it better, I'd put it in. So,
Yeah.
I'd obviously polarize it to it's like, that's too blue, too dark, but maybe the angle, maybe the direction we're facing, maybe we're facing towards the sun. So maybe the polarizer doesn't do any darkening. And in fact, it lightens up the sky. So it was a combination of trying to just ride the edge of this look that we were trying to create.
I want to talk about the camera package and this kind of unique film transfer process. I don't know if I have it 100% correct here, but it sounds like you shot digitally and then transferred to film and then redid it back to digital. It sounds like there was quite a path that this film had taken in the transfer process. Can you talk to us about that process and kind of how you got there?
We, again, early in the discussions, Denny and I were talking about what is this film. There's always the big picture, like this is how it feels.
Yeah.
Then there's like, okay, welcome to the land of reality.
Yeah,
We have
exactly.
to film this thing, right? So how the hell do we film this thing? Like, what is it? Is it film? Is it 65? Is it digital? Is it anamorphic, spherical? Like, what is it? So we went out to the desert, just not about 2 hours out of LA. There's some great sand dunes out there. We shot some 65 mil IMAX, 35 mil film, Alexa. It was a bit of a smorgasbord of cameras. We shot a couple of stand-ins, doing some walking, moving around, and then we went to there's a brutalist dam. I think it's the Sepulveda Dam in Los Angeles, and shot some stuff there as well. Tested out diffusion, like going back to that point about things being diffused, like using like I think there's black silks that a few friends of mine have used that looked kind of interesting. So I started to get a feel for what diffusion might work
Yeah.
and what wouldn't work. And then we got the footage and we cut a little, 5-minute piece and we watched it and we assessed what was the feel that we were after. And had you asked me before that test what I wanted to shoot, it would have been IMAX film, 35 mil anamorphic for non-IMAX. A lot like, I guess, what Linus used on recent Bond, and what Hoyters and Nolan have used, Chris Nolan have used. Like that package for me felt good, like just in theory. But in practice, we looked at it and Denis went, "This is not right. This is too nostalgic." His words were, "It's too nostalgic." And I
What
was
did
like,
that mean to
"Okay."
you when you heard that? Too nostalgic.
Well, it meant that we were doing a sci-fi, but without all of the sci-fi gack. Like there were no blinkies, there were no chrome robots walking around. Like there was no computers in this world. Like it's not how this world works for very deliberate reason.
Yeah.
So a lot of the design sort of looks a little bit ancient and brutalist and simple. Like if somebody had said to you, "This is something set in an alternate universe 10,000 years ago," you'd kind of believe it because there's very little technology.
Yeah.
So I think his reaction, and agreeing with him, was that in that respect, film made it look a little bit dated. Whereas the digital test that we did had more of the feel that he was kind of after, but it was still a little bit sharp and a little bit digital. So in that case, we realized that to create that softness, again going back to the softness thing, if we went out to film, we would then take the edge off the digital. So in combination with the lenses that we chose, T-stop we shot them at, the diffusion we used, and then the film out, we kind of created this sort of soft world, not as harsh as pure digital.
So the camera that you chose, which camera did you end up choosing?
We shot with the Alexa LF.
Okay. All right. So you did the Alexa LF, and then you did a 35 millimeter transfer?
So we did. We tested 65, IMAX, 15 perf, 8 perf. We tested all of the options. Ended up feeling that 35 mil, the interpos, I think it is Jupneg, or again, this is where I look at the footage, we agree on something, and I forget the next.
Yes, it's out of your mind. Yeah, exactly.
So I should really become more au fait, but there are articles that like AC Mag are doing and that are more technical in that they've spoken to the post house. So I would highly recommend, to get into the weeds of what that is to listen to the words of Dave Cole, my colorist.
Yeah, we'll search for a couple of links to those stories and throw them in the show notes if you guys, for those of you out there that really want to get technical with it. But it's just an interesting process nonetheless. So when you got this back, what about it gave you that feeling of like, yes, we found it. This is it.
Well, I'd seen it before. I'd done the test before a number of times, not for any film, but I knew that this was a technique that was lingering and was possible.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody had used it on a film before that. I believe Photochem might have done something with Soderbergh a few years prior. Anyway, I can't remember exactly, but not an entire movie. And when we looked at it and tested it, there was one particular shot of a sunset that was clear as day, no pun intended, what the difference was. It was obvious. This one shot of the sunset, and it became so clear that what the film does. And again, I'm not dismissing pure digital here, nor am I dismissing pure film, because sometimes the film digital debate can get a little like religious almost, where people are kind of going, oh, you're dissing on digital, you're dissing on film. It's like, it's not the case. It's just, for this film, what the film did was it softened the edges of the digital, and it gave us something that film acquisition couldn't give us, and it also gave us something that digital acquisition couldn't give us.
Let's take a moment and talk about MZ, empowering filmmakers. Now, MZ is all about educating the filmmaking community, and that's what we are here at Go Creative Show. So it's perfect for us, and it's the best place to go to learn all about things like directing, cinematography, post-production, visual storytelling, and more. And you can find out more at gocreativeshow.com/MZ, MZED. Now, their courses, first of all, we've got things like Advanced Editing in DaVinci Resolve, The Art and Technique of Film Editing, which is taught by Tom Cross, who's the editor of La La Land and No Time to Die, among others. And that brings me to my next point, which is it's not just about the courses, it's about the educators, which is so important. And we're talking about educators that are working in the field, they're at the top of their game, like Vincent LaFerre, Shane Hurlbut, Philip Bloom, and it goes on and on and on. Best part about it is you can become an MZ Pro member and get access to all of it, all of the hundreds of hours of high-quality video-based filmmaking education. You can buy individual courses, though, and regardless of what you buy, you get 20% off by using the coupon code GCS20 at checkout. Takeout. I'm hungry, I guess. GCS20. So check it out for yourself. GoCreativeshow.com/MZ, MZED, MZ, empowering filmmakers. I want to talk about the camera movement and some of the focal lengths. You can't watch this film without the word epic coming to mind. That's like all you think about as you're watching it. Every single shot feels giant. And what I found unique about Dune is, I mean, you see this a lot when you're dealing with superhero movies or any sort of sci-fi or just larger than life movies always have kind of a grand epic feel. But I think what Dune did so well is it brought in that humanity. It allowed the viewer to really experience these environments with the actors. And I'd love to talk to you about the camera angles, focal lengths that you chose, kind of have that balance between epic and intimate.
When we were with the characters, we tried to find the balance between being too long lensed and being removed, or being too wide and being in their face. So the LF, the large sensor on the LF, allows you to use a mid lens yet be reasonably close to your actors. Spherically, I'm talking about, and anamorphic, I guess too. But spherically, you can be close, which means that you're doing an IMAX sequence. Fantastic, because you're able to be in here, but you're able to be on a mid lens, but you're able to be close. To me, that the proximity of the camera is integral. It's why I love Chivo's work that he's done with Inarritu, and he's done with a lot of his work actually. It's so there. You can feel that intimacy is so you're so close as a viewer. And so in this case, we were not using those lenses, but we wanted the intimacy. We wanted to be able to be close. So there are times with Timothy where he's experiencing, spice episodes, that we're able to get nice and close to him to be that intimate.
Yeah.
And also feel the world around. That again, I know some directors that have a tendency towards 35s, 32s, 27s, 25s, because what they do is they feel that, but then also they can feel the world around, and they're not just in here. So we found that those focal lengths gave us what we needed, where we could exclude the background enough, but not totally.
I think those large shots, the intimacy in some of these scenes is just fantastic. You really can be drawn in by the characters. But the shots where you are so wide, it's so large scale, and our characters are just little itty bitty in the scenes, those are the ones that really make you understand and feel this sense of like, there is nowhere to go. Like we are stuck in the middle of nowhere. And it gives you this intrinsic kind of, fear for them, for yourself, just this idea that's like a nightmare world to be in the middle of the desert, knowing that there's all these, I want to call them snakes, the worms, the sandworms. Just the fact that you're able to create so much fear in those super large shots and that vastness, I thought was just really interesting. And love to talk to you about kind of the way you approach scenes like that, where your characters needed to be isolated.
Well, I think the way to do that is obviously you've had to have set it up properly with characterizations, but also that you're creating that scale. There's that one particular shot of Paul in front of the sandworm, which was a very, very clearly storyboarded shot that was, very much a planned shot. But it's creating small figures, like it's creating small figures in big environments. And like there is a certain sweet spot to an angle that you've got to get, otherwise it doesn't feel big enough, or like you've got to see the whole thing, but you've got to be far enough back that you see that character. So there's no hard and fast rule about a particular distance or a size. It's just a feel that one gets when you keep moving back and go, okay, now they're too small because I can't feel them. So do you get lower and see more up, or do you bring them close to the camera? Or there's a balance there that's struck.
In that particular circumstance with the sandworm, and you have your character, and you need to be far enough back to get that scale right, but also you're working with visual effects, so there's a little bit of an unknown there. How did you approach that scene to turn out the way that it did?
I mean, you've got to work with incredibly good VFX supervisors, which we did. Paul, who was incredible, and then Denis, who obviously is also incredible. I seem to recall framing that up not being quite wide enough, and then them going, no, that sandworm's only 12 stories high. This should be 45 stories high. So it's like, okay, can we get back any further? And I think there are times we ran out of room when we're on the backlot. There are times to create that scale, we actually physically ran out of room, in which case that's when our post friends help us, because they can shrink people down, and there's a bit of discussion involved. But I love that too. Like for me, when I watch films, I love to feel that scale, and often that scale has to occur being down at ground level. Often, not always. Again, it's not always the case, but like we're being grounded with those characters. We're on the same plane as those characters, as opposed to being up in a chopper, for example. Overlooking him and the sandworm, that kind of wouldn't have felt right. So it felt right being on his level.
Yeah.
The time to be in a chopper would be when they're in choppers, when they're in that chopper and that's their story.
I loved those, by the way, the little like dragonfly choppers
Oh,
were
ornithopters,
just
yeah.
so cool. I love that. All right, so back to the sandworm and the visual effects. I'm curious because there is a bit of unknown when you're working with visual effects. Were you able to see anything on set? Were you able to actually like see any wireframes or something? I know, there's a way to kind of create a world in Unreal Engine and put sensors on the cameras and kind of see the visual effects in real time. Did you explore any of that for this film?
It was a little bit of that. I mean, it wasn't set up fully like that. We did not shoot on a volume, so we didn't have that opportunity to see that in Unreal, for example.
Mm-hmm.
There were some times, yes, we had the iPad, where we could see that sort of the early stages of what a set might look like. But that's all. It's all very early days for that technology. Like
Yeah.
it is getting better, and I know it's getting better because I did Mandalorian, so I know
Yeah.
where it can go and I know what it can do. It hasn't filtered through the entire film community yet to create that level of technology. Like we're straddling two worlds or three worlds now with filmmaking. There's traditional filmmaking with the addition of some VFX. There's very VFX laden production process, and then there's fully VFX. So we're sort of straddling a number of different worlds right now. And on Dune, we were a little more traditional. There were definitely technological advances or technological things on the set, but we did get to view some sets in 3D, and like there was some definitely technologically some good things in there. But I think the show was a bit more grounded technologically, which, to be frank with you, I think is the advantage that it has,
Yeah.
because it's got all the advantages and benefits of 2021 technology. Yet we filmed it a little more traditionally. You know what I mean? So you've got this best of both worlds thing where the technology is able to the film's being made like a traditional movie, but it's just being augmented by current technology. I mean, I feel like that's the best of both worlds.
I agree. And I think that's what kind of made it feel. I'm not like a huge superhero movie person. I mean, I went into Dune knowing nothing about it. I didn't read the books. I didn't see the prior movie. I went into it just because I was excited about it. The trailer looked amazing. I knew it was going to be a hit for sure. And I focus more and I'm more drawn in by the characters really for really anything that I watch. I love, I mean, who doesn't like great special effects, but special effects alone can't hold my attention for 2.5 hours. And I feel like you guys did a great job of bringing in and inserting those really human moments. In particular, there's a question that came in from, again, Demango Shake on Instagram. Great questions, Demango. The question is about your having confidence to let an actor's face stay in the shadow. And I think that's a really interesting point. It's not just the decision to do it, but the confidence to make that decision. Actors want to be seen, like directors want to see actors. They pay a lot of money for them and they want them to be seen. And I think there's a lot of situations in Dune where it's so dark that you, in some cases, can't even see the faces. I'd love to talk to you about that, how that decision was made, and maybe a little bit about the confidence it takes in a director of photography to do something like that.
Sometimes there's an issue. Audiences are very savvy visually, I think. Like even people of an older generation, like my parents' generation, I think even though they don't have the Instagram and they don't have all the social media, they are very savvy when it comes to visuals. They don't know what they don't know. They don't understand why something doesn't feel right or what doesn't look right. So therefore, I would hope that I am the conscious conduit for their unconscious visual path. When we're sitting in an environment, we're trying to create a mood. That mood is as big a part of a character as the character itself. Like if you've got something important going on that needs to be underplayed. I mean, look at The Godfather. I mean, look at Marlon Brando, like in The Godfather.
Yeah.
Like, look at the darkness in the eyes. I mean, imagine if he sitting in front of a refrigerator and like brightly lit, like looking like you and me right now. The believability factor would just disappear. I mean, still be Marlon Brando, still be amazing performance, but suddenly, like, you're not as immersed in the characterizations. So, I think having the confidence to know that your characterization and your darkness is going to be helping characterization at times. I mean, I would also hope that it's not oppressive darkness too. There are times where you've got a little glint in an eye that's creating darkness, but enough to see and feel into a character. Now, that's obviously a debate, isn't it? It's obviously like it's a debate where someone can go, not enough or too much. And I have it all the time. With the director, if you're standing on set looking at a monitor and you go, I think that's a bit too dark. What do you think? They go, yeah, a bit more fill in the eye. Suddenly, fill in the eye can help, but it can also change the mood and change the tone of the scene.
Yeah.
So it's like skirting a fine line between being helping the scene feel a certain way and helping it be distractingly dark.
To that question about confidence, though, are you in situations where people are saying, I think it's too dark, and you're saying, no, this is the right thing to do? It's like, do you ever feel like you're, I don't know, kind of those debates on set, like you said, do you ever feel like you're the one pushing for the darkness?
Thankfully, I've been able to be working with directors who have a very, very good sense of taste. And a film set's not a democracy ultimately. Like, it's not let's vote on if this is dark enough or something. It doesn't come down to that. It's like, I feel like this is good. Do you feel the same? No? Well, let's discuss. Let's get it feeling right. Let's get it feeling so it's good. More often than not, actually, in a lot of cases, it's the director pushing to go slightly darker. Because again, they understand mood and tone.
Yeah.
And it's such a fine line, because how is one viewing this? Like, I remember I did Zero Dark 30 a few years ago, and the end of Zero Dark 30 is dark. That's the whole point, is it's dark until you get night vision. And I walked in and they'd lifted the entire movie in the theater. So I'm watching the entire, well, I didn't actually, I had to leave, but the entire first 3/4 of the film was all lifted to account, I'm assuming, for the end of the film. So I couldn't watch it, because to me, it destroyed any mood or any kind of any feel that you get watching the film. So there's a fine balance, and it takes a great collaborator, director wise, to kind of work with levels of darkness. Obviously, the whole film can't be like that. You've got to have moments of clarity,
Sure.
like, otherwise but you've got to then know when to pick your battles.
So you walked out of the theater. You were that pissed.
I wasn't pissed. I couldn't watch it.
Yeah. It wasn't what you intended.
No, it wasn't the film that I'd made. I didn't want to watch that. It didn't look good. Simple. Like,
Yeah.
It was, again, I'm the conscious manifestation of a subconscious audience. Like, I didn't get into the characters. Like, I've watched that film now 50 times. I love that film. I couldn't not watch it, because it was like, there's no mystery, or not mystery. There's nothing to it. It wasn't good.
So how do you feel about the Dune being released simultaneously on HBO Max as well as theaters? I mean, people have the option to quite literally see this on a giant screen or their phone. I mean, it's kind of a brave new world now with cinematography and filmmaking. What is your thought about that?
It is a brave new world, and Denis has expressed again, he has been a conscious manifestation of the subconscious audience, and he has expressed his concerns about that, and I 100% stand by his concerns and what he's said. There are people going to be watching this film on the subway, or on the tube in London, or on their way to work, and they'll watch it bit by bit over the course of 17 journeys. I mean, who am I to stop that? I can't. I just have to do the best that I can, knowing that we have made this film for a particular way of viewing it, first and foremost, and then everything from that point is ultimately as a compromise.
Yeah. Do you make any accommodations at all while you're filming, or not even accommodations, but do you even consider the fact that this was going to be released on HBO Max and watched by a lot of people on TV simultaneously? Did you even know at the time?
No, that was different timing. That came out
Okay.
at a later point. So, but the point's valid about, like, because it's always going to get released on some
At some point.
format,
Yeah,
isn't it?
exactly.
So you always have to assume that your beautiful detail that you spent hours working on is going to get seen by that lone passenger on the subway during his 17 times he's watching it, to finish the movie. So there is that relevance. But again, if you make a movie or light a movie for the lowest common denominator, then we know what we're going to end up with. It's very clear.
Yep.
So you can't.
I think the overwhelming reaction out there, and yes, I am sort of among a group of filmmakers most of the time. So maybe my opinion is biased, but I think for the people that I know and that I've spoken to and just listeners of the show that have seen it on HBO Max, if anything, it has inspired them to then go and see it in the theater as well. I feel like that was really my experience as well, is I, for convenience, saw it on HBO Max, but then immediately was like, this is going to be so amazing in the theater. Like that. I almost feel like it, in a strange way, I think it excites the viewer even more to go and see it the intended way, I guess, quote unquote. I mean, that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I've got 3 kids. I know how hard it is to get to the theater. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I can't blame somebody for not being able to draw themselves out of the real world and get to a theater, to an IMAX theater, which is, there's not that many of them around. So I get it. And I would never dismiss somebody's choice to do that. It's just, I know how the best way to view it is, because I've seen it. And so, I mean, it's going to be what it's going to be ultimately. And I hope that people take out of the movie what they want, regardless of how they watched it.
What was the most challenging scene for you?
There was a whole series. Often a scene is made up of a whole series of problems. Like, it's not just one problem. As it, like the ornithopter, the sandworm eating the spice harvester, for example. Like,
Yeah.
that's one scene. It's written as one scene, but that was a series of problems. Like, how do we do the series of problems needing solutions? How do we do the flying work? Like, how do you have them flying over this watching? Like, and again, how do you do it? Do you do it on stage? Do it on the backlight? Do you put it on a gimbal? Do you do it against blue screen? Like, how do you actually do that? When they land in the desert, and when they land in the desert, you need infrastructure, because infrastructure is, we need a crane to be able to turn this ornithopter around and lower it down. So therefore, we need to be near a big base of, to be able to get construction cranes in the sand dunes in the middle of the desert. How do you get a construction crane into the sand dunes? I don't know if you've ever tried driving on sand, but it's really hard. So there's a whole series of problems that would occur that you would never think about when you're watching the film, hopefully, right? You'd never, ever want to know how you got the crane in to be able to lower this ornithopter, to be able to have Josh Brolin and Timothée Chalamet jump off it and then jump back on it and have it rise up again, spin around. Like, they were a series of problems that we needed to overcome. So over the course of 3 or 4 different places to shoot that, we shot backlight, we shot in a gimbal on a hilltop, we shot in Jordan in the sand, we shot some stuff in Abu Dhabi. Like, it was solved over a course of a number of different ways. So
that scene was spread across all of those locations, you're saying?
Yeah, for the most part. We very much over every way you could possibly imagine, we shot that.
Now I have to know, how did that big giant, what's it called? The spice,
the spice harvester?
The spice harvester.
Mm-hmm.
That final shot of it kind of being sucked in, where did you ultimately end up doing that?
Okay, so that was done in Jordan. Now, and the reason is because we put the actors up on the landing craft, the landing section and we had to then mount a camera out, and we looked past. Obviously, there was no spice, there was no sandworm, and there was no spice crawler, and we couldn't get up to the height that we wanted. Like, that height's at 2,000 or 3,000 feet or something like that.
Yeah.
So we could never do that, but what we could do is we could get the ornithopter up on a crane. So the crane lifted up this ornithopter, we had a hard mounted camera that was giving us the right angle, and then we just turned the ornithopter. So at least then the light moved as if it was banking around the VFX. But this is where, like, the shot's pretty much in camera, except for the spice harvester and the sandworm.
Yeah.
So hopefully then the VFX then look more real, because again it's all in camera and the light moving is all real. But then all VFX have to add. I don't say all that. I don't say it disrespectfully. They have to add a lot, but all they're really concerning is laying over that action on the correct tone, because we're shooting against sand.
Yeah. Were you on real sand for most or all of this film?
Yes.
I think that just makes such a huge difference to be. I mean, it obviously there's visual effects, but it feels so practical. It really does. When you watch this movie, the effects just feel real.
I mean, it has a very different color. I mean, sand has a very particular color, and it's very tactile, and people move in a certain way on sand. So for the most part, if they were on real sand, we were on real sand. So, wherever that was, Jordan, Hungary, Abu Dhabi. Yeah.
There's a question here from, I think it actually may even be our producer, but it's something that I was obsessed with when I was watching it. Those floating circular lights. First of all, I want them.
They're cool, right?
I'm like, I love these lights. that floating circular light. Talk to me about that. It's just such a simple, I'm sure it wasn't simple to make and to film, but it's just such a small detail that I think makes those interiors look so unique. Especially when you're sort of blending between the sci-fi futuristic feel, but also that kind of like old, is this 10,000 years ago or 10,000 years ahead? I don't know. Talk to me about that.
So those light, obviously, whenever you're talking about how to light a night scene, right? There's always going to be the discussion about how it is. Like, what sits in this room? Is it a practical light? Like, and what is that practical light? How does it sit there? Is it on a stand? Is it hanging? Is it just there? In the book, there is reference to a light that moves through the residence with the characters, and that seemed like a really interesting idea. Although, like you said, technically, not easy in any way, shape, or form, because you're moving lights as if they're weightless around with actors. So we ended up, rather than putting lights just static, we put lights on moving stands that would move with the actors. Obviously, when it's a still scene, like Jessica and Leto in bed before they go to sleep, those lights are still because they're still. There's no need for the lights to be moving around.
Sure.
But when they move, when they need to move, they move. So we just went, well, they just move, don't they? Like,
were they remote controlled? Like, how are you moving them around on set?
It varied. It depended on the shot. Like, there were some big wide scenes that we shot where we had them on dollies and tracks and crane arms. We had some decent sized crane arms. And there were other times we had some rigging into the ceiling. And there are other times we had it on a dolly. I know that, for example, there's a shot where they're walking out. The Mother Superior and and Jessica are walking out to her ship, and it's a profile shot, and the light's moving with them. We put that on a dolly and track, and put the light on there, covered the dolly and track in a solid, and then just walked with it, and then covered it with fog and post production, painted out any gack. So there are different ways of doing that.
I love that. Now, the last question I have for you is from a listener, Helicopter Films, wants to know your approach to night exteriors. It's so weird. We get so many people in our audience when we get questions. They all want to know about night exteriors. That seems to be a thing that is, it's a big question in the Go Creative world, and seems to be, I'm sure it brings some unique challenges to it.
There are so many different ways to shoot nighttime that it's a good question, because like you can't just say, oh, it's night desert. Like often a scriptwriter will lazily do evening desert, and evening is like this. Well, what is evening? Is evening dusk? Is it just after dusk? Is it blue light? Is it night? Is it dead of night? Like, what is evening? And evening often for a screenwriter is it's illuminated nighttime. Like, again, it changes in script to script, but often it's an illuminated nighttime. So in this case, we had to come up with a consistent night look for this movie. And there's two different types of night. There's the night that takes place on the battle, the landing pad, as the place gets attacked.
Yeah.
And then there's night in the desert. So there's two different types of night. One that you can motivate with fire and explosions and burning palm trees. But then when they land in the middle of the desert, there's no motivation. So, of course, we can say anything. We can say there's two moons, or there's a really bright moon, or there's no night. Maybe it's just always an eternal dusk or whatever. But we ended up sort of approaching that in a visual way of flat ambience. And so therefore we had to figure out ways to shoot that. Now, most of the time we shot that sort of in shadow, so like late afternoon or dusk and dawn. So for the most part, we shot dusk and dawn and then graded it to look like nighttime.
Yeah, the night scenes in this are interesting. And you're right, you really can kind of do whatever, in a way, because you are, thousands and thousands of years in the future in a different world. But I think more often than not, the choices were made to have it feel relatable in a weird way.
Yeah. There are the unfortunate, and Dean and I even talked about going, well, maybe there's two moons, maybe there's two shadows. We're like, okay, well, let's explore what that would look like. And it was a good idea in theory, but in practice, lighting with two shadows just looks like really bad lighting. It looks like really bad stage lighting, know. And you can get a light out in the desert to light an actor. That's fine, but what happens to the rest of the desert? Like, you need thousands upon thousands of lights to light the entire desert. So we had to come up with a consistent approach that was going to not hinder performances. That wasn't going to be like, okay, sorry, actors, you can only be between here and there because there's a crane there and there's a Musco there and a balloon here, and like sometimes you can trip over equipment, and I find that if you can come up with the right premise without having to trip over the equipment, then I think that's a better result.
What did you end up going with? I mean, we just
dusk and dawn for night, and shadow, afternoon.
Yeah.
Shadow.
Yep.
Obviously, when we're on stage, interior ornithopters, nighttime, we're able to light those because we're on stage. But anything that was taking place outside, we had to do that sort of for real.
Wow. Well, the unmakeable film is no more, apparently, that you broke that curse.
Yep.
The film is absolutely fantastic. I know everybody listening to this and watching this right now has seen it for sure. And if you saw it on HBO Max, I encourage you, please go to the theater because the experience is just so much different. And really, the intended experience is in the theater. So, Greg,
and hunt out IMAX too. Hunt out IMAX if you can.
Yes, good call, good suggestion. You're so fun to talk to, Greg. Like, you're just so great on the air. You're really good at explaining, your motivations and why you're doing things. So I really enjoy speaking with you, and I'm already looking forward to your return to the show. What are you working on next?
Don't know. There's a few things in the pipeline that are due to come out. I don't know. It's a very interesting next couple of years, I think. So, yeah.
Well, there's a couple things I'm not allowed to talk to you about, but I think we all know out there listening, but we really appreciate it. So please come on back. You're a lot of fun to talk to. And I know our audience loves you when you're on.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
All right, I want to thank Greig Fraser, Director of Photography for Dune, for coming on the show. How great of a guest is Greg, and how much we learned today. I really appreciate all of you guys for listening, and of course, those of you that ask questions, great questions. We really, really appreciate it. I also want to thank Connor Crosby from ignitionvisuals.com. He is a producer for me at Go Creative Show, but he also produces projects for my production company, BC Media Productions. So he is embedded in all the things that I've been dealing with over the past few years and does a great job. You can find him at ignitionvisuals.com. I also want to encourage you all to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. All things Go Creative Show at gocreativeshow.com. And if you want to know what's up with me, You can find me on Instagram at Ben Consoli, BenConsoli. Thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next week on another episode of the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers.